Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of the Vice Chancellor and Registrar of Rajiv Gandhi University of Health Sciences, I welcome all of you for this continuing medical education webinar series on COVID-19. Unfortunately, due to previous commitments and busy schedule, our Honorable Vice Chancellor is unable to join for this meeting. I request Dr. Dayanand to kindly conduct the proceedings. Over to Dr. Dayanand.
Good afternoon to one and all, and warm welcome to all of you. Today, we are all joined for the webinar that is public health challenges and the preparedness for the COVID-19 third wave. So today's speakers are, so it's my privilege and honor to welcome today's speakers. Dr. Pradeep B.S. is a professor of epidemiology in NIMHANS, and Dr. Lalita, professor and HOD of community medicine, MS Ramaya Medical College, and Dr. Nandakumar, professor of community medicine, MS Ramaya Medical College. So now the need of an hour and the hot topic is the preparation for the third wave. So that the speakers are going to highlight about the topic. So now with this background, I welcome the speakers. Over to Dr. Lalita. Dr. Lalita. Dr. Lalita.
Sir, thank you very much for a kind introduction. Good evening to one and all. I thank the RGHS, Dr. Dayanand sir, Dr. Mahendra sir for giving this opportunity for us to share our experiences and what preparedness we need to do as a public health specialist. I think I'll be starting program with giving the experience of Spanish flu for learnings from it, and also second wave learnings with what we need to move ahead and prepare for our third wave. So I'll be starting with that, and after that Dr. Nandakumar and Dr. Pradeep will be talking about the roadmap towards managing this upcoming third wave. Thank you very much for this opportunity. With this, I will start my presentation. Sir, is my screen visible?
Yes, madam. Yes, madam.
Yeah. I think we all should, will all believe that those who do not learn history are doomed to repeat it. And I think this COVID-19, as the second wave of COVID hit us hard, I think we need to look back and see what Spanish flu has offered us to learn from. With this background, I thought let us look at what is the Spanish flu and how it has impacted. And I think this is the statistics which we are seeing in our country, where we had a second wave, which was taking us hard hit many cities in the country. And we had to face much more consequences of second wave as compared to the first wave. So we see that fortunately with the strict lockdown coming in, we have reduced, the peak has come down and it's trying to hit hard, and it's almost to the last peak of the first wave. It's reached the first week and that first wave, and that is a sign of relief. But however, with lockdown restrictions being removed, we must be cautious enough and see whether we are in for further rise in or surge in the cases. So we can see that in all the major 6 states, which across the state, we are seeing that across the country, it's dipping, and that is the peak is coming down, which is a sign of relief for us. So when I was just trying to learn from this second wave, we thought somewhere we have forgotten about Spanish flu, which had offered us so much to learn about. So I wanted to just look at and review how has Spanish pandemic gone through, and is there something which we need to learn and reiterate for ourselves so that we are well prepared for this third wave. I think 2018 was the 100th year of 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, after which we had 3 major pandemic in our history. that is the 57 Asian pandemic, 68 Hong Kong influenza pandemic, and 2009 swine flu pandemic. However, the major one was the Spanish flu, which had a huge mortality. And typically in Spanish flu, there were 3 waves, which was interestingly, I felt it was coinciding with our existing COVID pandemic. First wave was mainly mild and mortality rate was not unusually high. But second wave again hit hard as it happened to COVID-19. I'm just correlating with second wave with our COVID pandemic with this Spanish flu. And there is glaring difference was probably the age group with which it affected in the Spanish flu. Spanish flu hit hard on the younger population as compared to our COVID pandemic. And typically the mortality was high because of the same cytokine storm, which was manifested as high fever, cyanosis, and rapid deterioration death, which typically occurred in 7 to 10 days. And of course, there was a third and final wave. It was not so virulent, affected few communities. If you think that the same pattern would repeat, we can believe ourselves that third will be much more milder than what second wave offered us. So Spanish flu was one of the biggest pandemic in our past history, where 500 million people were infected, with 50 million people were killed, and case fatality rate was more than 2.5% in across the places. So what was the questions which offered us to think about is, why was this pandemic more virulent than any other pandemic of the 20th century? And why did some survive and some succumb to the infection? So, and one more important thing is, the biggest advantage what we have in our COVID pandemic is we know the virus, we have the diagnostic tool, and we have so many things to offer. Whereas in Spanish pandemic, we didn't know what was the virus all about, and we didn't know the tools to diagnose. And it was basically, they found that viral factors, which was hemagglutinin and polymerase gene segments, which were determining the severity of the case. In fact, the virus was very lately isolated in 1933, and the complete genomic sequence of whatever it was done was in 90s. So without knowing the agent, they had a bigger challenge to address. And if you look at the host factors, in the first wave, it was a U pattern, wherein the younger population and the older population were affected. Whereas in the second, it was a W pattern, wherein the young adults, that is less than 30 years, were affected, and that was a cause of concern. And there was immunopathology. I felt the immunopathology, what was resembling in Spanish, was almost similar to this, but I felt it was much more virulent, affecting the younger population. We had humoral immune response. Some of the adults who had previous infection due to various other influenza had antibodies, which helped them to be protected against this Spanish flu. And genetic factors, the single nucleotide polymorphisms determined some people were affected and with higher mortality, some population were affected with the lower mortality. That was basically their genetic predisposition, what was explained. And in the Indian context, malnutrition and the grievance of susceptibility, those who had malnourished and those who had malaria had a predisposition to Spanish flu. And the mortality which contributed were the secondary bacterial infections, which added to the progression of the death, especially the Streptococcus pneumonia, H. influenza, which was more common compared to other bacterial infections. And interestingly, the non-pharmaceutical infections, without knowing the agent, came in handy. And it was initially the major things what we were discussing now and was enhanced was there that time also. And the challenges were similar to what we are facing now. So they had quarantine, mass gathering banning, face mask and hygiene. So initially it was basically marine quarantine, wherein the ships were not allowed to enter the country so that they prevent the infection. However, many times it was not effective because too late imposition or already the infection was entered the country, and most often the breach in the quarantine, what we saw in our own country also when we had early phase of air travel quarantine. Whereas now we have air travel quarantine, we feel that we have already seen that it is most of the time limited, because we all know that asymptomatic cases do spread the disease. The screening is not for them to pick up all positive cases. So though advanced modeling is there, educational campaign is equally important if we have to enforce quarantine in place as a measure to prevent spread of infection. In fact, there was an example where in American Samoa and Western Samoa, where quarantine was strictly implemented in American Samoa, their mortality was significantly lower as compared to Western Samoa, which implemented the maritime quarantine a little later. And so that could come down heavily with the increased mortality. So, and again, coming to the mass gatherings, I think this is the one thing which has come to our rescue, given the chance that we have a susceptible host and we still have a long way to go for herd immunity, wherein the banning or restrictions of gathering of people, which will prevent the efficient transmission. And this was way back in 2009 pandemic also, the 18-day mandatory school closure was found to be effective, and it's reduced in 29 to 37% reduction. So, and as an evidence, even now we can see that COVID pandemic second wave has significantly come down because of lockdown effect which has come in place. And next important non-pharmaceutical intervention was practice. Though they didn't know the virus, they all believed that it was because of airborne transmission, and they had enforced legislation to use face mask in public places, and had special task force, especially in Japan, San Francisco, Guatemala City, which found to be useful. But again, the proper wearing of mask, the proper fitting and the material used, all this was a cause of concern even then. And they all found out that just having obligatory is not going to help. It has to be behaviorally motivated, community involved campaign, which will help in enforcing these kind of measures. So these non-pharmaceutical interventions will remain important before the vaccine becomes widely available in the country. However, the success, as I was telling, is because it depends on the early and continuous implementation. It's not important just that the people impulsively do it when these cases. It has to now be our norm to continue this hand washing, use of face mask and physical distancing, which are the three mantras which we need to follow, and people's willingness to comply, because it is a behavior issue which needs to be addressed more continuously and engage them so that they will be actively participating for this activity. So medical measures that add concerns even then, they also, because of want of proper treatment protocols, there were homemade remedies which were tried, which were done now also. And nursing care has been important to, especially to prevent the secondary infections in those cases. And now we are very in advantageous position, I can say, because we know the agent. We are in a good position to even go to the extent of genomic sequencing. However, the issue of adequacy is an issue, and we have rapid diagnostic tools in place where we can test them, track and isolate them at the early phase so that you can prevent the transmission. And use of antiviral drugs were used, but we know that now we do not have any, we have almost ruled out many drugs available currently for the treatment aspect. And vaccines is the key for today's context. Either we need to get vaccinated or vaccinated to achieve the immunity. So these were the determinants which ruled the Spanish flu. And from this, what we are trying to understand is, we know that it was caused by virus, and with the presumption of airborne underlying the public health measures, we now know that it is because of virus, and we need to emphasize all these public health measures which we are talking, especially the non-pharmaceutical interventions. So, but finally the pandemic subsided in 1919, with most of them either acquired immunity or died. So the impact was much more larger because the immunity was achieved by death or by infection, which was not a pleasant thing. And we also saw that treatments were rarely effective and often unsafe, and testing vaccines was not there that time. And there was, in fact, the trials and all those were in still infancy stage. And mental health issues and distress were compounded by the losses due to war. The World War I was also happening simultaneously. So those things added to the grievance. And of course, now also we have these mental health issues and distress, which is happening because of morbidity and deaths. So I'll not skip this. So we had therefore the questions were whether uniform lockdown will be helpful. Well, we saw that this was helpful in our first wave, but with the second wave, we must realize that whether it will be possible to continue with this kind of uniform lockdown, because we need to keep a balance of both the our current local situations and then take actions, keeping in balance the life and livelihood. So just to summarize what we have learned from this Spanish flu, or are we better in position compared to the COVID pandemic? Definitely yes. And I think we should be in a better place in controlling this from a public health perspective. We know the virus, as I was telling, we have a powerful diagnostic tool. And whereas Spanish was much more infectious than COVID-19, and it killed a younger lot compared to our population, what is being affected. And now we have better communication in place. We can connect to the world. We can collect the data and compile and have evidence-based approach to all our interventions in place. And we have genomic sequencing. With genomic sequencing, several vaccines are now being rolled, and we are in an advantageous position, such that if we have vaccines program rolled out in an effective way, we can cover the population and improve the herd immunity and prevent the much more effects from either the second wave or the third wave, which is going on in certain places. So what made us happen? With all this experience, we still had second wave after the success of what we can say the control of first wave. Is it the complacency and overconfidence? We do not know. Strategies that kept the pandemic did not apply for second wave. I think there were various theories to believe that we thought we were conquered the first wave, but we could see that health system was crumbling during the second wave. We were overwhelmed. It is not that we could have built this health infrastructure which was there from longer time, but with this kind of pandemic or the cases input, the existing health infrastructure could not have been improved, and we couldn't have done much. So it crumbled and we were overwhelmed, and harnessing the existing manpower remained the challenge. And community involvement, they also there was lax in their behavior, which has resulted in the rapid spread of this wave. And of course, the vaccination rollout program, there was some glitches. The policies kept changing. Strategies adopted didn't match the demand. The demand was there, but the supply chain was hampered because of various issues. So with this, I felt the following areas we need to concentrate and see to that we prepare ourselves for the third wave. I think my colleagues, Dr. Nandakumar and Dr. Pradeep will be discussing in detail, of which I will be just touching a little bit about vaccination and surveillance. So what's important is surveillance as a public health measure. We need to keep a continuous watch as we come down the peak of the second wave. We should be vigilant and see to that whether we are in the controlled bay or we are in the spike. And as we move towards the spike, we need to adopt the interventions as appropriate to the local strategies. I don't think we need to have a national level strategies, lockdown and restrictions, which may not be feasible. So look at the local situations, review the situation in terms of mortality, morbidity, and positivity rate and testing rate, all these indicators to keep a track of how your program is going through, control measures are in place, and accordingly you need to take actions. And we need to see that infrastructure overnight, we may not be able to ramp up the complete infrastructure. What is existing, we may have to realign and reorient ourselves to suit the anticipated age, which is predicted, especially the pediatric surge, which might be expected. We need to ramp up our infrastructure to meet the requirements of this. The greater challenge will be the manpower training, which is pediatric care. If they have to look at adults, we are now more or less, we have set protocols, treatment protocols in place, which helps us in handling the adult cases. But when it comes to pediatric cases, it requires a little bit of manpower training and ramping up the capacity building exercises across the state and country. And community involvement in not only the appropriate COVID appropriate behaviors, but also in vaccine acceptance now, which is offered from the government to improve, to have their own protection, is very important to remove all the negative myths and misconceptions. These are to happen simultaneously. As we offer the interventions, the simultaneous efforts towards community behavioral change is very critical, because that is what matters for them, for any program to be successful. Secondly, about the research, we have the data points needs to be accessible, and get data-driven research should happen, and data-driven intervention should be appropriately planned. And private engagement and regulations, not to underline, we need to rope in public health infrastructure is not adequate. We need to rope in private and civic societies and NGOs to combat these pandemic of these scales. So with this, I'll just elaborate a little more 2 points on vaccination and surveillance, and then close. So we know that vaccine works, and vaccination program was rolled out, and as a country of our stature, the supply demand gap was too big, and the policies kept changing. And I think that is very important to see that once we know that vaccine is going to work, we need to see that supply chain should be ensured. In fact, it is been told that Covaxin vaccine, which is from Bharat Biotech, uses 360 ingredients from 10 countries. 200 of them are from the US countries alone. And this, of which they have US and UK, we have subverted the supply chain to prioritize their own needs. So these are the issues which at the policy level, the government has to see to that this vaccine supply chain is rectified, and export these bans and which are critical in manufacturing them, and have locally manufacturing capacity enhanced. See to that we are more domestic manufacturing capacity is created, so that we have more vaccines to come in. And the other important thing is to have equitable share of available stocks of vaccines. Well, we have vaccination program going on, but we see that it is more happening in the cities. We have a lot of challenges which is happening while our major population is in the rural area, where they have the issues of this COVID registration, and they have vaccine hesitancy. So these are the issues we must look at, and we must remember, and this is the gaps which we are seeing, and this is the data as on June 14. If you look at India, we have only 22% of the population has been currently vaccinated, and Karnataka stands at 29%. So we have a very long way to go. We are looking at least 75% herd immunity to be achieved, and we see that there is a lot of gap which is happening. This gap is vaccination with at least 1 dose. And we have, again, the gender gap. We have male and female. Females are less protected compared to male. That is one more issues we might look at. So what I'm trying to say is the vulnerable section of the population, which is very important for us to see, which we need to address. If you're looking at equity, should also be addressed. So the other important point I would like to drive is the global monitoring and public health surveillance, which should be strengthened. So we need to consolidate the fragmented research which is happening across the globe, and compile and see and build in evidence-based research in terms of prevention, treatment, diagnosis, or care, and bring in research and strategies based on the data-driven, evidence-based research. And public health surveillance. I think this I should thank Dr. Sudarshan for leading on me to these points of importance, which is very important. So we need to continue our sentinel surveillance, continue testing and tracking people. Even if the positivity rate comes down, we need to continue the testing level and conduct district level zero surveillance so that we pick up early surging cases wherein we can come out with measures such as restrictions and movement restrictions and gatherings so that you break the chain of transmission. And now there is a sewage surveillance going on to see that the virus is continued in the environment, so that gives an indirect evidence that whether the virus is in the environment. And genomic sequence, of course, to see that do we have new variants coming in and how infectious they are and what we need to take care of, and in terms of vaccination or prevention measures which we need to plan in future. So lastly, will the third wave occur? This is the question everyone is looking at. Well, we have an susceptibility infection prediction model, which is now predicting that we are bound to have third wave because we still have a huge susceptible population, which is neither infected nor being immunized. And to build up herd immunity of 75%, we have a long way to go. With the current rate of vaccination, it's expected that at least we need December time to be at least one dose of vaccination to be completed for our population. So the prediction model expects that the peak starts from August and then peaks in somewhere in September first week and then slowly tapers in October. So with this in mind, the next question is, will the kids alone be affected? This question, both yes and no. Yes, because kids are the ones who have been majorly spared in our first and second wave. No, because probably we have the ACR receptors which are not well developed in kids, which is a good news so that they are not affected. Even if they are affected, it is predicted that they'll be milder in nature and they recover faster, unlike the adult population. And the kids will be recovering faster is the other assumption. And now the vaccines are, vaccine research are happening in the children, and soon we must look forward for the vaccines for the children, which will help the thing. So it's not, let us not be bogged down by the kids alone will be affected. We still have a huge population of adult population, which is left out, which is not be either vaccinated nor be affected by the disease by itself, who are still prone to be, who are still can get the disease, and we will still have such cases occurring in the third wave. So while we are gearing up for pediatric cases, which is very critical, we also should look forward for adult population also, which we are likely to get even in our third wave. So just to conclude, as long as susceptible population are there, we will have infections and in deaths, and will definitely be getting our third or fourth wave also. But I think looking at the previous Spanish flu experience, it will not be to that level of second wave. So while the vaccination is rolled out, ramping up of our existing health infrastructure and capacity building to care for the surges which will happen is very critical. And poor section of people are affected more than the wealthier. So our policies and our strategies should focus heavily on these sections so that it mitigates the impact of pandemic both on life as well as livelihood. So public health measures will continue to be crucial in mitigating even further waves of infection and also to reduce the threat of new variants. And though we have tools to predict virus behavior, community behavior responsibility is crucial and the most toughest intervention of all public health measures. And continued public health surveillance to keep a watch on the surge and appropriate local interventions should be the call of the day, is what I feel. Thank you. Any questions here, or we'll take the questions at the end?
We'll take the questions at the end of the session, ma'am. We can start with the next speaker.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Nanda will take over.
Thank you, Dr. Lalita, madam. And at the outset, I would like to thank the Rajiv Gandhi University and the seniors who are there online and the support we have received offline as well for giving this opportunity to present. I'll share the screen. Is the screen visible?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So probably in the next 6 to 8 minutes, I'm going to just run through the stories so far, which Dr. Lalita has traced the Spanish flu pandemic and how we need to learn from that. But more specifically, rather than generic, let's come to the specifics of both the first and second wave and what were the challenges that were posed and how we can overcome them in terms of effective preparation, as if it is a disaster that is bound to happen, because we are at least adept at creating certain disaster response plans in India for the last few decades with natural disasters. So this, if we approach it in that way, probably we'll have some kind of semblance of mitigating the outcomes. The three major components for effective management will be in terms of physical infrastructure, human resource management, consumables and supply chain logistics, which I'm sure Dr. Pradeep will elucidate more in detail as to what needs to be done. And lastly, the third wave, what next? I'm sure this is a very familiar slide for most of us because over the last 1.5 years, we have been used to seeing these numbers on both Government of India, Minister of Health and Family Welfare website, as well as the Karnataka website, where the confirmed cases, the active cases, the recovered and the deaths are being showcased at a regular interval, almost on a daily basis. So the specifics in terms of like when COVID hit early 2020, Jan, Feb and all, the issues were more on understanding the dynamics of this disease transmission. Though there was a causative agent, we were not sure about its various components of infectivity, the pathogenicity, the virulence, how the disease is going to spread from one individual to another, the force of infection, the mortality rates, the potential spread for wide geographical areas. We were grappling with those issues, and it was an evolving phase both for testing and treating protocols. The awareness, especially in the public awareness, both pertaining to the disease spread and its prevention, was relatively low, because we were looking at more of like, okay, this is something new that is happening, but we were not ready to get into the deluge of cases that was caused due to the COVID-19 wave. International guidelines as well were sort of like unsure about like when to introduce a lockdown, when the international travel needs to be cut. So there were these evolving protocols both at the international, national and regional levels, which led to variation in the occurrence of the pandemic. And one of the major things which most of us would remember was the scramble for N95 masks, face shields, and personal protective equipment for people who were actually treating COVID patients. There was this supply chain logistic problem, both in terms of production, in terms of demand, and also ensuring the right equipment reaches the right place. And one of the biggest thing that happened was the ostracization amongst the general public, where the first case, I still remember in the apartment where I stay, they were literally scared, and the barricades that were put up or the roads that were being blocked, this caused a lot of issues around the disease. And as a consequence, people were afraid to even say that they have these symptoms, which led to more increased rate of transmission. On the contrary, in the early April of 2021, when we saw the second wave rising, as Dr. Lalitha mentioned, it was mayhem. The number of cases very rapidly increased. The peak was very short. And suddenly there was this overwhelming of the existing infrastructure, which is what we use to define a disaster. It's a phenomena which overwhelms the coping capacity of an existing system, which is what happened. Despite the best efforts at increasing the manpower or the hospital infra, it just proved that beyond the coping ability of the system, the cases increased. So was the problem with the supply chain of these certain drugs, which now we are convinced may or might not have a specific thing. But at that point of time, be it remdesivir, tocilizumab, bevacizumab, all these MABs and other had an acute shortage where there was a mad rush for getting those drugs. The third thing was the bed allocation systems. I'll say about it because without anything, it would have been much more worse. But the system itself got swamped with the number of calls, number of patients requiring critical care beds, especially the HDU and the ICU beds, was in acute shortage. And as a consequence, there was both a despair and a chaotic attempt at blocking the beds that were supposed to be for some reason not available. And also this surge for demand in oxygen was another nightmare which occurred, where we were seeing patients in the triage area literally gasping for breath for want of that oxygen support. The escalating mortalities as a proportion to the number of cases in the high critical care settings also added to this dilemma of where to burn the bodies. The cremation itself posed a very huge challenge. And the logistics nightmare of transferring the bodies to the final rites was very, very difficult. And the most important thing that happened was this fatigue amongst the healthcare workers, where we realized that it did have a toll. For the first time, probably the doctors were afraid to enter their workplaces, fearing for their own, but more importantly, their family and their near and dear one's safety. So in this context, there was sort of a situation which literally brought into furore the kind of health system, the resilience of the health system was tested beyond its coping ability. So in this context, the various public health experts, the task force, or the senior expert committees that were set up by the BBMP and the Karnataka government, the whole approach was in terms of a disaster management approach. And some of the learnings or the lessons that we are seeing is short-term measures seldom work for long-term problems. The reason this statement has been put is it was actually quoted by one of the senior persons on the committee, where they told that just by creating a huge 1,000-bedded facility in a palace ground might not be the solution beyond this peak or whatever we were seeing at that point of time. The second thing was that there was a systemic and a systematic inability of the system in terms of there were, let's say, ventilators which were available, but the manpower required to use them was not sufficiently skilled. Similarly, some of the plans which were introduced to sort of bridge that small surge were not going to be sustained for a longer time, because the people who were deployed into the ICUs from multiple other departments were not ready to handle those cases which a critical care expert would have to do. Similarly, like post-disaster, when we looked at like the long COVID or the post-COVID, the infrastructure was not sufficient to handle be the cases of mucormycosis or the secondary complications that occurred after COVID. In fact, the mortality analysis at one of the hospitals revealed that during the second wave, a considerable fraction of people did die after recovering from acute COVID due to fibrosis, due to other conditions as a consequence of this long COVID syndrome that we are now familiar with. So to an extent, what worked, the list is very sort of like small because there are many other things that have worked, but I just took a small sample of it. The efforts of the government, along with public and private partnerships in responding to this, was something which was not seen in public health parlance for a very long time. We had private doctors, public health specialists, clinicians, administrators, and non-health people coming for health in a truly cohesive manner. There was this adoption of technology. There was an SRFID, BU numbers, the entire mechanism which did bring in some semblance of an order in an otherwise chaotic situation. But at the same time, there were some things which could have been optimized, like the testing and tracing of the entire population. Though the numbers are extremely huge, probably some of the smaller countries have done that in over a period of 3 months. Within one day, Bangalore or Karnataka, we were able to test. But still, it left a lot to be desired for. And this is the time when we are having a second wave and a third wave gap, where we need to address some of these things in terms of standardization of treatment protocols, human resource and skill training. Quality assurance was something, since we were in that panic mode of addressing the danger in the room, we were sort of skirting around some of the issues which can be sort of put in place before we move on to the third wave management. And also the public health research, which Dr. Lalit was mentioning, where evidence can come from our experience so far and also from global centers of excellence. So coming to the physical infrastructure, we have realized and we have known that semi-permanent structures, because like for the sudden increase, there is nothing like creating a permanent thing which will be required beyond it. So there's kind of a COVID care centers with 1,000 beds were necessary at some point of time, but to ensure its sustainability, we need to understand that there should be creation of such systems within available healthcare infrastructure which can be strengthened, so that beyond the pandemic, for non-COVID and other issues, this can actually be seen as an effort at improving the current healthcare physical infrastructure. The next thing is parallelly strengthening the existing facilities with equipment, because this was again, that was something seen, that appropriate level of equipment for both adult and pediatric group, using the principle of population proportion, where the percentage of pediatric population who are more likely to receive that kind of or expect that kind of care, we can certain models can be created with expert opinion, so that we are ready at least to handle 50 or 70% of such cases through adequate physical infrastructure. The most important or the critical gap that we observed was in terms of human resource management. Just by redeploying someone from X to a Y location will not bring in those competence, was what was understood. And the time interval that is currently available need to be utilized in both skill development and training of such personnel who could be sort of like put in for specific purposes in the coming days. So many medical colleges have this advanced learning centers, skill development labs, and creating these teams is what is required, where not just one person, but a team of a doctor, nurse, paramedic, physiotherapist, and lab technicians can be trained, so that rapid deployment of such personnel into non-urban or the areas where they are required can be done in a more meaningful manner. It's something similar to the paramilitary or the reserve police who are called upon in case there is a surge of something that happens. The last thing is with regards to consumables and supply chain logistics, where appropriate equipment, because we did see in the second wave, there was a scramble for oxygen concentrators, seldom realizing that the 2 or 4 liter flow that the concentrator would provide might not be sufficient for a person who would require that HDU support with high flow oxygen or something which is different. So in that context, ensuring that education of not only the healthcare personnel, but also the general public, this is the time for us to put these things in place in terms of physical infrastructure, manpower and human resource training, consumables and supply chain logistics, and create a digital ecosystem for transparency, quality assurance, and dynamic real-time data analytics will probably help in managing the third wave. And I'll stop here, and probably once Dr. Pradeep gives more specific inroads into it, we can take a few questions at a later stage. Thanks a lot once again. Dr. Pradeep, on to you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Nanda. Good afternoon, everyone. And at the outset, I would like to thank Rajiv Gandhi University of Health Sciences for this opportunity. And I thank on behalf of the Department of Epidemiology and Center for Public Health NIMHANS. At the same time, I would also convey my regards and namaskaras to both my mentors and teachers here in the audience, Professor M.K. Sudarshan and Professor B.J. Mahendra, and all the other audience present in this webinar. And we have heard Dr. Lalita and Dr. Nanda Kumar talking about first wave and the second wave and what needs to be done. And there are certain things which they have touched upon, and I would be elaborating many things which they have touched upon, right from learnings from the Spanish flu to the learnings from the first and second wave, and some amount of information which Dr. Nanda Kumar has given regarding the third wave as such. So one question which we need to look at is third wave a reality? My answer will be both yes and no. The reason is it might happen, it might not happen, because nobody knows the truth. And considering previous epidemics and epidemiology, it is a possibility. Modeling data also suggests that the third wave is a possibility. So we need to be prepared. And this particular session which we are having is probably a beginning for us to think and start being prepared. So the impact of any wave, especially the third wave, depends on vaccination and COVID appropriate behavior according to me. The impact decreases with increased vaccination and also decreases with increased COVID appropriate. If you look at this table to simplify it, taking the vaccination strategy which we have adapted in the country and availability of vaccines, it is the 18 plus who are being immunized right now. Everybody beyond 18 plus are being vaccinated from 21st of this month to start with. So only those who are not vaccinated or less than 18 years put a question mark, because that's a big probability. You never know if we get a vaccine which is approved to be used for those who are below 18 years. So the majority of the susceptible population in terms of proportions will be those who are less than 18 years old. And logically looking at it, the number infected will also be probably more. But if you look at those who are more than 45 years, 18 to 45 years in this table, there will still be susceptible individuals there, and thus there will be those who will be infected there. And new variants are changing prevalence, pathogenicity, and also transmissibility of the virus, the severity, whether it is mild, moderate, or severe disease, the pattern mostly remains the same. That way, we can deduce from the first and second wave that those who are affected below 18 years will mostly have mild disease. This is based on our knowledge and understanding of the first and second wave. So what needs to be done for those who are 18 to 40, more than 18 years? Maybe there will be more moderate and severe diseases compared to less than 18 years. So we need to have hospital-based care delivery, especially the DCH season, designated COVID hospitals, And if we look at it, we are already prepared for it. We have systems in place. There are DCHCs and DCHs, and we are okay with it. For those who are less than 18 years, we foresee that there will be more individuals who will be mild, who will have mild disease or who will be asymptomatic. So, one is we need to look at home isolation or at the most COVID care centers. And we need to train people on monitoring home isolation and also following them up for those who are in home isolation. And in terms of pediatric case management and following up things, because if there are more number of pediatric cases, we need to have a slightly modified strategies compared to what we had in the first and second wave. So training and capacity building and ensuring manpower will be something which is needed for the third wave, specifically when compared to the first and second wave. So what are the special focuses which we need? So what are those special focuses which are needed for the third wave? With the second wave, we have learned that there needs to be decentralized management. Centralized management is going to overwhelm the system at the state level. So better to have it at the district level, decentralized, and to take a call whenever it is appropriate. Psychosocial support, to me, will be the biggest thing which we need to be prepared for, because compared to the loss of an elderly individual or infection or loss of a youngster or a child is going to be much more sensitive and much more emotionally taxing for both the family and the society. So even one loss of a child, even one loss of an youngster is very emotional, very sensitive, and it is going to be taxing. So we need to strengthen district mental health programs, school mental health programs, specifically because those two are the established programs and we have a system in place. We can also utilize other counselors across the board, across disciplines, so we can train them. So some examples are, there are skill development counselors from Skill India, ICTC ERT counselors within the National AIDS Control Program, industrial counselors are there. So there are so many such people who are available for us to train and get the manpower which I mentioned here in my previous slide. Care of caregivers also needs us an attention here. Reason being, it is mostly involving the child or those below 18 years. So Dr. Nandakumar was talking about panic situation and people frantically buying oxygen concentrators, hoarding it at home, frantically running around for remdesivir and other things which we saw in the second wave. So we need to have special focus on care and caregivers as well, which includes parents, family, and also healthcare personnel. We have seen a lot of burnout issues among those who are among the nursing, among the people taking care, among the doctors as well. So we need to focus on these things specifically for the third wave, because if it affects younger adults and children, it is going to be a task which is in hand for us. Special COVID care centers or the current COVID care centers, BCHCs and COVID hospitals need to be equipped because individually one single child is difficult to be held in a hospital or a COVID care center as we did for adults in the first and second wave. It is not going to be easy. So we need a parent to stay along with the child. There might be specific needs of meals and other things. Maybe parents might be comfortable to get meals from their homes, not what is supplied from the hospitals and things like that. Some sort of a thing or arrangement needs to be made, or at least the guidelines need to accommodate such requests or needs of parents and family of children. There might be a requirement of a creche as well instead of a COVID care center. Such things which we need to vet out and brainstorm and come up with an answer for it. Based on the learnings from the first and second wave, I feel personally trained communication teams for pediatric cases to inform family and media is something which is required. The reason is video calls or just one call every day might not be enough from a consultant or from a doctor from within the hospital. It is required for specifically trained communication teams to be placed with the hospitals to take calls from the family or to make calls or inform family as well, along with one caregiver staying with the child, because it is difficult to hold a single child within a ward or in a COVID care center, given the basic nature of a child. This thing, it is going to impact a lot of other things, not just COVID, it is going to impact their psychology. So we need to focus on that as well. So we have spoken about this many times in our technical advisory committee meetings, and I also advised Jharkhand government on the third wave preparedness. And this is something which is being debated. I personally feel with the learning from the first and second wave, looking at when during the peak, when there is turnaround time is high and testing positivity or negativity, a syndromic management needs to come up. And children generally are not tested because if there is an adult who is tested positive at home, if the same symptoms are developed, children are not brought to the testing center or not tested at all. They are given syndromic management or given based on symptoms, and then we have seen children recovering more so as asymptomatics or as people who have had mild disease. There needs to be follow-up and close monitoring of home isolation cases, especially among children. So we need to start promoting volunteerism, for which we have a huge youth resource like youth clubs, our own Yuva Spandana program, people trained under Yuva Spandana, because there is about 100 caregivers, psychological support providers who have been trained on home isolation also from us, who can be utilized for this as well. The NSS is a huge resource. There are about 5 lakh volunteers throughout Karnataka who can be utilized. The NCC, about 2 lakh volunteers, Scouts and Guides. So we have a huge resource on hand who can be trained on monitoring and follow up during home isolation, maintaining COVID appropriate behavior, and maybe triaging, I'm not sure, but triaging mostly comes to the fore of health and family welfare. So maybe it is better to keep that away. And there is need for aggressive training and involvement, including Ashas, Anganwadi workers and health workers, rural development and Panchayati Raj, because of their ground level reach and the phenomenal amount of workforce we have within the rural development and Panchayati Raj institutions. In fact, now in the second wave, the rural COVID care centers were developed through the rural development and Panchayati Raj mechanism, and it has been seen to be very efficient and possible to do things. And along with the current war rooms, there need to be dedicated war rooms to manage pediatric cases, because it is much more emotional and much more anxious for people. So it needs to be managed very well and very efficiently. There needs to be audits monitoring local enforcement teams, because during the second wave, putting in place these local enforcement teams monitoring and audits actually brought some sense and brought some discipline into remdesivir procurement. Even now, this for mucormycosis, whatever the antifungals we need, those procurement, oxygen supplies, all these kind of got streamlined, bed of allocation and things like that. Established public-private partnerships. During the past 2 waves, what we have done is we have started talking to the private people only when there are increasing cases, and then we started to look at there might be a need. But I would suggest better to talk now, get things in place, and have mechanisms when private beds get openings, get opened for government directed or government referred cases. So the mantra is to talk now. And we also need to focus on other macro level issues like other health issues like immunization, routine immunization, weekly annual folic acid supplementation, deworming programs, Anganwadi and other nutrition programs need to continue. Educational and socio-economic harms and inequalities. Dr. Lalita was speaking about all these because we need to know, because we are sitting on a time bomb and we don't know how this 1 or 2 years of lack of personalized school or institutional based education compared to digital based education or online education has an impact over time. So we need to think about all those. Judicious use of radiological services. We have seen HRCT being utilized very rampantly, and a lot of people, they give their sample for testing, go straight to a radiology center, get a CT done, and have a CT, and a lot of radiation exposure also need to be looked at. And we also need to work on setting up makeshift orphanages, care homes, etc., which is already being done through the government. That needs to be done. So we need to have an implementation plan both for micro level and macro level. I am focusing mostly on macro level public health measures because Dr. Nanda has already spoken to you about micro level hospital and healthcare delivery scenarios as well. So macro level public health measures to have an implementation plan, when to have lockdowns, when to have close downs, and when to have curfews, because this needs to be in place. We don't need to think about whether this is the right time or not. With the 2 waves experience we have, we can actually have a preparedness plan. So Dr. Nanda also said, short-term measures seldom help us or prepare us for long-term. So we need to have these lockdown, close down curfews. Closing and opening of schools and colleges also need to be done, because we have learned from previous epidemics affecting children and young adults that just one measure of closing schools and colleges will bring down the transmission and will bring down the infection rates or test positivity rates among children. So that is something which we have to do early in the initiation of the third wave. So I think we need to look at that aspect and have a implementation plan. Social security measures, these SOPs and packages which are being done, also need to have an implementation plan so that there is no demand from the media, public, or anybody. Based on a guideline, these SOPs and packages can be done. Economic activities have to also be thought about locking and unlocking. Interstate and intrastate transport or mobility and migration, we need to take a stand as a state, because health is a state subject and there might be some things which we need to follow from the federal or the central government, but we can take action regarding intrastate transport, interstate transport as well. And robust logistics and supply chain management, triaging at the ward level and probably at a panchayat level, which has been initiated within Bangalore city, actually helped in avoiding panic and also reducing the bed allocation or triaging issues which we had when people directly went to COVID hospitals and we're not having space for beds and other things. Step up and step down care, drugs, oxygen and vaccine supplies for the same. Not just drugs, oxygen and vaccine, also the cannulas, the oxygen piping systems, nasal tongues, masks, and those supplies also need to be thought about. Bed allocation is something which we need to have as part of robust logistics and supply chain. With all these, we still have key uncertainties to say what will happen, whether there is a third wave or not, things like that. So the uncertainty is we don't know what is the level of adherence to social distancing and other restrictions, especially when the lockdowns are eased out. And right from yesterday, we are seeing people are following at places, not following at places, and we need to look at this, which is an uncertainty. The impact of vaccines on transmission. So whether a vaccine can transmit the infection or whether somebody infected can transmit infections to vaccinees. So all these are certain things which we don't know, especially when there are new variants in the offing and we don't know what's the impact of those new variants on the third wave also. And there is one more thing which is, there is some studies going on, we don't have an answer for it. The possibility of waning immunity post-infection and post-vaccination. We don't know how long the immunity is sustained post-infection and post-vaccination. That is something which is an uncertainty which we have to look at or factor in when we are getting ready or we are getting prepared for the third wave. When we look at the Karnataka experience, I am obviously comparing with the Jharkhand experience of about 1.5 months now. So Karnataka has a very active and experienced technical advisory committee, specifically 2 or 3. There are many more committees, but these 2 or 3 committees are things which I know of personally as well. So those two to three technical advisory committees are very active, and the government is very, very proactive in listening to these technical advisory committees and coming up with it. And there is a digital management system which we had developed for the first wave, the rapid appraisal of, which is called the Rapid Management Dashboard to manage COVID-19 preparedness and performance across districts in Karnataka, which helped assess preparedness of all aspects of pandemic management during the first wave. And the recommendations of those that activity served to be true for the second wave. And this entire state was covered in just 3 days. Many of the people who are in the audience were part of this activity because district level medical colleges were involved as teams. It is an entirely digital process. So Dr. Nanda was talking about digitizing and focusing on digital medium. Dashboards are available for quick and easy decision making at the district level. The DC can see, district commissioner or magistrate can see and take actions. It can be adapted to quickly suit dynamically changing pandemic situation as well. So this is the dashboard, and people here are the team from within NIMHANS, and there were of course other people from the state as well. So, but with key uncertainties and possibility of third wave, but there is a ray of hope, and me being an optimistic person, I think or I wish this is true. So the history based on looking at other epidemics says second wave is always the largest. We hope that it is so, and second wave is lesser compared to the previous waves. Modeling data in some places also indicates that infections and mortality might be lesser than the second wave. The impending third wave, mostly which is the children or the young who will be affected or infected, and it will be either asymptomatic or mild based on data from the first and second wave. Very few children might need hospitalization. Large number of more than 18-year-old will be vaccinated is the hope. So, and another thing is first and second wave in India came after the waves in Western world or in many other countries. So we have an opportunity and time to learn from those third waves where it might occur early, and we can adapt to those situations as well, looking at it. Added to that, we have very active technical advisory committees and district level teams to work with. In summary, our mantra is to increase vaccination, probably to adapt a locally appropriate vaccination policy and strategy, saturate 18+ years as much as possible. If things shine bright and there is an availability of vaccination or approval for those below 18 years, we need to get that done. Maybe we can consider house-close vaccination, but there needs to be a lot of logistical considerations which need to be managed. And routine immunization, nutrition, anemia control programs and other programs also need to be looked at, because multi-inflammatory syndrome is something which is being talked about, for which malnutrition, anemia, lack of immunization are also considered risk factors. So we need to focus on this as well. Effective implementation and adaptation of COVID appropriate behavior, more on the community, less on the system. But even then, the system needs to look at how it needs to be done. Depending on experts need to be our mantra. Training and capacity building on pediatric case management, younger adult case management, vaccination, home isolation, and these things. IEC and media management assumes importance more so with the third wave likely to be affecting pediatric age group and younger adults. Decentralization of implementation will be our mantra. So I propose, or I would say, a model which is expert guided, government facilitated, specialists involved, personnel trained, ensuring intersectoral coordination, public-private partnered, infrastructure equipped, evidence-based community participation model is something which needs to be our mantra to work on for the third wave. So in short, if we have to write an adibaraha, as we call it, tagline as we call, we need to train all, sensitize everyone, prepare ahead and act quick, especially with the third wave. So that is what I would say as our mantra. And thank you. And I would end with this quote, that even the smallest thoughts have the potential to become the biggest of successes. All we have to do is get up and take the right approach. So we have started in a small way today. Of course, there are many things which are happening, which has already started. So it is this thought which will pave way for the biggest of successes. Thank you very much, and thank you for patiently listening. Namaskar.
Dr.
Thank you,
Rupasri,
Dr.
please take over the question answer session.
Thank you, Mahendra sir. First of all, a very good afternoon to one and all. And thank you very much, Dr. Lalita madam, Dr. Nandakumar sir, and Dr. Pradeep sir, for giving the talk on public health challenges and preparedness for COVID-19 third wave. Thank you very much, sir. And with your permission, I'll take up the questions in the chat box. So first question is from Dr. Shehnaz. So she says, after the first dose of Covaxin, 1 month later, she has developed a fever, loss of smell and taste. Now, but then RT-PCR was negative after the symptom. Now the question is when they should take second dose of vaccine.
Can I answer?
Yes.
I see with the first dose, probably she would have harbored the infection, and with first dose, the vaccine protection efficacy is about 70%. Dose is given and it's after the 15 days. Now that she's got after the first dose of vaccine, probably she's susceptible, or she was in the incubation period with which she has got the infection. As per the guidelines now, the infection to defer the second dose at least for 3 months. New guidelines.
Okay. So they can go for second dose of vaccination after 3 months.
3 months.
Okay. Right. Any comments from other speakers also you can share. Or I'll take up the next question. So this is question from Dr. Deepa. So the question is, what is the mortality rate due to COVID among children below 18 years in the first and second wave, either in India or globally? Is there any data available?
Yeah. There is definitely data available. I'll just update it. But the mortality is not very severe as compared to the adult population. It has been more or less mild and asymptomatic. I'll just update to the data. I don't. Pradeep, if you have data, you can express.
Offhand, I don't have data, but what Dr. Lalita mentioned is true. Mortality among the young is very, very low. So it is, we can say it is near zero. So that is something which we can say, but offhand, we don't have data.
Right. Gautam, do we have any hand raise options?
No, madam.
Yeah, I will just tell you with the second wave, the mortality with less than 10 years is 0.27%.
Okay.
In the second wave and 0.3% in the first wave.
Right.
Okay, the death rate as compared to elderly, which is about 8 and 9% respectively.
Okay. Right. Okay. The next question is from Dr. Ashmita Alex. Sir, what is the, with the lifting of lockdown, at least partially, will the spread of COVID-19 continue to decrease?
See, is it okay if I take?
Yeah, please, sir, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So, with the lockdown being lifted, it is likely there will be more opportunities for the virus to transmit. So, transmissibility will increase, and there will be a slight increase in the infections also. But immediately, I don't think there will be an increase. It will take 1 to 2 incubation periods to raise one. If COVID appropriate behavior is followed, ensuring masking, sanitizer, so physical distancing and things like that, and considering the very low positivity rate, it is, we optimistically think it would not be very high, but it is based on the experience with UK, US and all. US not much. With the UK and the Delta strain there is a surge in cases happening in the last 1 week or so. Looking at it, it is likely here as well.
Right. But I think continuing with the question, even though it is a partial relaxation of the lockdown with the public, taking a lot of freedom, again, it becomes like lockdown, release the lockdown, increase the disease. So it has become like, so how to tackle this question?
Yeah, very important question. I think this is where we need to look at community, sensitization and make them periodically. This has to happen as a simultaneous activity, saying that, well, we have released, not that the virus is free. I mean, virus is still there. So right. Unless we are vaccinated, we need to be cautious enough and our appropriate behavior to stay on for next 1 year probably. This is a behavioral issue, and I think it has to be constantly and reinforced among the public.
Right.
Madam, I'll just add to that. See, lockdown has never been a means to sort of like decrease or increase. So it is more so to ensure the interruption of transmission, and there are other dynamics as well. And this being a medical group, I'm sure the people would understand that lockdown will give us so much time so as to ensure other definitive measures are brought in place. So like the next question I'll just take, because Mansoor Ahmed has asked, do we have sufficient ICU beds for pediatric patients? Sir, even the regular beds itself, the proportion in the government sector or in the private sector is relatively less. But having said that, this is what Pradeep, myself and Dr. Lalita, when we were trying to put across, the knee-jerk reaction is not expecting a surge. You create so many ICU beds because there have been attempts in the past. In Hyderabad, there was a nice hospital which had only ICU and critical care services with all the beds dedicated for critical care. And it was not a commercial success. So in that sense, like while we are as public health experts planning to respond to a situation, it is not what is currently or immediately that is going to happen, but ensure that like we are prepared to handle that sudden increase with some kind of via media solution, but at the same time strengthen your existing infrastructure for managing severe cases as and when they occur. So the short answer, we don't have sufficient ICU beds or general pediatric beds, but we might not require it in those numbers as we saw for adult population, as Dr. Pradeep has mentioned.
Where the ICU bed thing, there is the talk going on for looking at hybrid beds. Basically, adult ICU and pediatric ICU, or adult oxygenated beds and pediatric ICU oxygenated beds could be interchanged and utilized. That is something which also is being looked at. But pediatric ICU beds are being worked upon and then organized across the state as well within Karnataka.
Right. So a question from Dr. Irfana Farheen. Is CRP test mandatory before vaccination for vulnerable group?
No.
As far as I know, there is no such guideline. I would like Dr. Lalita.
Yeah.
Dr.
No, as of now for vaccination, we are not doing any of those tests because one, it is not feasible. Secondly, it is required at the moment. Basically, we are screening now. Maybe sometimes some people are asymptomatic also, they would have come for vaccination. We do not know. So we are only going by symptoms. If they have symptomatic, test them. If they educate people that they're symptomatic, not to come for vaccination, get tested and come, that's it. If they're asymptomatic, not to get CRP or any of such tests before taking vaccination.
Right, right.
Thank you.
So a question from Smita Ranjit. How vital is it to follow double mask protocol? Is this really necessary if we use the appropriate mask?
Okay. Well, use of mask, as I was telling, this was an issue even in Spanish flu, and it is very clear that anything that filters the virus is fine. So now coming to the quality of mask, none of us are very clear except for the N95 mask and surgical mask. We do not know about other masks. So we have cloth mask, various type of masks are available in the market. We do not know really the quality of the mask. So keeping in mind the uncertainty of its filtration, that's wherein this double mask is coming into force. And I think as a protection, it's no harm.
Right, right.
You want to add anything, Pradeep or Nanda?
I think I don't know. It's how we wear the mask right is more important as compared to 2 or 3. So N95 for medical professionals, like N95 is the right way, I mean, like the type and the technique is what is more important. I agree with you on that.
Right, right, sir. Gautam, do we have any hand raise options?
No, madam.
So another question from Afroz Jahan. Sir, how should the reopening of educational institutions be planned in relation to third wave?
Okay, that's $1 million question. But having said that, like as both Dr. Pradeep and Lalita and myself, we are not sure how the pandemic will span out. Given the current situation in terms of like we are just recovering, I'm using the current present continuous tense of the second wave. So in that context, it is still a far question as to when they will open or eventually will it open in the coming few months. So unless there is sufficient evidence of the cessation of transmission for which we have sufficient epidemiological means and methods, the moving average, the positivity rate, or the serosurveillance efforts which are being taken by certain select pockets, So if there is a sufficient evidence of the cessation of transmission in the general population,
Right.
at that point, we will be able to even think of the lateral things. Otherwise, it's not a knee-jerk reaction. Cases has come down. The schools anyway, they are going to charge the fees. Let us send. How many of us as parents are confident to send our children will be the first question to start with. So rather than thinking emotionally, scientifically, let's look at the indices of disease transmission. If they are conducive to initiate some action to expose the children, then I think we should be able to do that. So today is not the right time to even think of opening the schools, is what I feel.
Right, right. So another question, any comments, sir, please?
However, there is some notification which I saw saying schools and colleges need to open from 1st of July. So that is something which is looking at the trajectory, probably the government should have done. So we need to see and think by the day, as we say. So we need to see.
Right, right. Sir. Okay. A question from Dr. Prashant. How much percentage of population has to be vaccinated to attain herd immunity? Is there something like that?
There are varied schools of thoughts, but there is no definite answer for it. Especially when there are mutant strains which are occurring, and when there are varied vaccine efficacy of different vaccines, and as we have discussed in the technical advisory committee, it's best not to look at herd immunity and look at cessation of transmission and things like that. But given our epidemiological sense, this being a propagated epidemic, we have to probably live with this virus for a very long time and get adjusted to whatever we call as new normal. I think it's best to keep away the herd immunity thing to actually act upon anything, or now just look at number of cases or proportion of test positivity and then move forward. That would be my take personally.
Right. So the next question is from Dr. Ranganath. How should be our preparation for post-COVID patients rehabilitation or post-COVID complication management? This is also again repeatedly being asked from many.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think post-COVID complications are the fact which we need to address, and I think small efforts are happening in institutions. I think this has to be done with integrated approach with both medical care as well as the rehabilitation therapy also to come in place. And because it requires long-term, we see fibrosis, diabetes coming up, and psychological stress, some of these which need to be addressed. So respiratory rehabilitation has to be planned. So post-COVID complications clinics have to come in future is what I feel, which needs to be something is the need of the hour now, which is emerging in smaller areas actually.
Nandakumar sir? Yes, sir.
No, just to add to what Dr. Lalita told, 5 to 7% of the people who have recovered from COVID at some point of time are having long COVID or post-COVID symptoms. And among people who have been admitted, the proportion increases to 35 to 45% over the next 15 or 20 days. So most of the hospitals do call the patients for a review or a checkup where a list of common tests, be it be the 6-minute test for ensuring fitness and other things are done. And as Dr. Pradeep mentioned earlier, the state government protocol on post-COVID has also been provided to assess, evaluate, manage post-COVID management. Integrated management is something which is coming up. Even in our institution, they're trying to sort of bring in integrative approaches either through Ayurveda or other things for ensuring the rehabilitation process, especially the physical rehabilitation, respiratory rehab, and the psychological health of the individual. So it's a very important component that needs to be addressed.
Pradeep sir, would you like to add on to that?
I am fine. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. So another question, sir, from Dr. Manjula, sir, regarding this COVID management or stress management in healthcare workers. So this question, so how many health, because of this increased work, doctors facing challenges while treating patients or handling their relatives. What should be done at the policy level to take care of these issues with regard to healthcare personnel?
As I mentioned, care of caregivers, looking at psychosocial aspects of things in terms of our preparedness plan for the third wave would actually serve all these here. And a policy level decision, I don't think currently, as of now, we can have a policy for the third wave. But to handle all these violence, abuse, and other things, specific communication teams which are trained to address patients, caregivers, and media can also support or avoid these things or to an extent reduce these as well.
Any comments on this, Dr. Madam, Lalita Madam?
Healthcare worker stress is something which we are looking at. One is the working condition, because the new way of handling patients only is totally different now with the COVID scenario, because they have the fear of contracting the disease, and with the PPE to work in that, especially with, the hot environment was a big challenge. And secondly, see, we have, for example, I'll tell you, in our own institution, private institutions also, where the manpower is not sufficient enough to cater. Only medicine department was not sufficient. We had to rope in all the departments to get. So their expertise, the very thought that basically it's all about training. I feel training and preparing the people to work in these areas. They feel, I'm a surgeon, why should I do this work? It's those kind of stress are also coming in, which we are not factored in. Or gynecologist also have to do the stuff. We in fact had to bring in pre-para also to wrap up the requirement manpower. So these are some of the stress which we need to take them, prepare them enough, build their capacity, mentally prepare them, and then come into them. Because this is a pandemic scenario which is totally different, which is not a conventional way. So to make it feel that it is something different, we need to all pitch in. Secondly, to also address their stress level is
right. So, a question from Dr. Irfana. So, are there any studies on blood clotting and its complications post vaccination stage?
Especially with Covishield, there have been incidents, but anyway, these are all because we know we have rolled out the vaccine with collecting data on adverse events also. The data is still yet to completely bring in evidence that this vaccine has caused it completely, but still the process is on.
Right. So are there any studies going on, ma'am, to have this?
Yes.
So they are on.
They're on.
Right. Thank you.
But unfortunately, I see that the reporting is a little bit slack. I mean, it's not to the extent to what's happening. The focus is now on vaccination, and AEFI reporting is something which we need to bring in more focus, I feel.
Right. So another question from Dr. Ashita. If we finish with the vaccination drive by the end of the year, as per the government plan and promise, do you think we will be able to fight the Delta mutant virus or any other varieties from COVID-19 with the current vaccination available?
Again, it's a $1 million question to be answered. There are anecdotal reports, not evidence-based, that there might be some effect of current vaccines on Delta mutant virus, but there is no evidence as such as a study or something as I know. And about the other varieties, probably the virus itself will not know whether there would be other varieties of the COVID-19. In a lighter vein, I'm saying, but in order to drive home the message that nobody really knows whether it would be, whether the current vaccines would be effective on other varieties, other variants of COVID-19. Nobody knows. Only when the variant comes up and there are studies looking at it, then we will be.
Right. So we have, do we have any hand raise option? Just check.
No, madam.
No, okay. So we'll take up this last question from Dr. Avinash. So all over the world, in all developed countries, public health professionals are the ones who are taking primary decisions regarding tackling the pandemic. In case of India, when we can expect this change and how to promote this?
Look, looking at the different technical advisory committees, there are public health people involved, and public health professionals know where they are the decision makers. They are experts and provide inputs to the government, and they make the decisions. If we consider all the health and family welfare individuals as public health professionals, of course, some of them might not have public health degrees. Then yes, we are having decision makers. And what more do you need with people like Dr. Sudarshan and others sitting there as chairs of technical advisory committees? I don't know how more fortunate we need to be to have such people, and whether they are decision makers or not, they are very good advocates of decision making with the government or anybody. So I think let's stop looking at the Western world. Let's look at all said and done with the scale and with the diversity which we have. I think ours is a success story, much better compared to other Western countries as well. So we need to look within ourselves, we need to look here and actually look through the lens and see and know that public health professionals are actually there and they are probably driving the management of this epidemic within India and within the state as well. That's my take. Lalita had something to say.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with Pradeep. But I think this is a starting point where we can look at future. People will open up their eyes for looking at public health cadre at state and national level, which will boost the involvement of the public health specialist in this kind of decision making. We are there, but we need to be much more ahead, I feel. Thank you.
So we'll end up this question answer session with this last question from Dr. Deepa. Ma'am, most of the healthcare workers have taken their vaccination in the month of February, and protection of this vaccination, at that time they told it is 6 months to 1 year. So should they take another dose now?
I think as I got from some other sources, not with the reliable sources, they are looking for third dose also, but they don't have evidence as of now as to what extent it's going to protect. Maybe we have to look for evidence and see to what level of efficiency it is, or what level, how much period it's going to protect us. And maybe we can look at the antibody levels and then look for third thing. But we are now in the phase where we are having 1 dose of vaccination for all our population, which is a challenge to address first.
Right. So with this, we have come to an end of this question answer session. And I thank Dr. Lalita Madam, Nandakumar sir and Pradeep sir for answering all the queries. Thank you so much. Over to you, Danan sir.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Rupashree.
Thank you.
So I'd like to mention about the next program. So the next program, most probably the Friday, it will be on the nursing faculty. So the speakers and the topic, we will let you know in the due course of time. And good evening to one and all. on behalf of the Vice Chancellor and Registrar of Rajiv Gandhi University of Health Sciences, I take this opportunity to thank our speakers today, Dr. Pradeep, Dr. Lalita, and Dr. Nandakumar for their very well presented lecture. And then they made understand all the participants. And then they also answered all the questions raised by the participants. So on behalf of our Vice Chancellor and Registrar, I thank them. Thank you, Pradeep, Lalita, and Nandakumar. Yes. And then I thank today our, the guest was our Dr. M.K. Sudarshan sir. Sir, we are very thankful that you are with us today, and your presence itself will make the alertness among the public health people here today in today's webinar. We thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Dayanand. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. And then we thank our ECHO India for their cooperation with the webinars. And then we thank all our officers, officers of Rajiv Gandhi University of Health Sciences, and Dr. Mahendra, and Dr. Rupashri, and Somshekhar, and Kirti. And I thank all the participants who have participated in today's webinar. Thank you, one and all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you.
Gautam, you can close the meeting.
Okay, sir.